All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Coffee with Coaches, a separate podcast from the Dirt Trail Running. We are Ornery Mule Racing, where our mission is to spread kindness and community throughout our community of trail runners. Loretta, how are you doing today?
I am doing great, loving this weather. And for those that can't see, I'm sitting out in my screened porch in the nice, sunny, warm, unseasonably warm weather of Michigan.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's going to get up to 80 here in Barrington, Illinois. And I got out earlier this morning for a longer run, and it was 50s and sunny and beautiful. And I love those days when the sunrise takes 2 hours where you just see it slowly creeping up in the sky. It was fantastic. And you told me earlier that you got back from a run too. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I got back from a run not too long before the podcast, and I should have gotten out a little earlier like you did. I was thinking I was being smart and getting out early, but it wasn't quite early enough because it was warming up quite a bit. And wow, what a big change in the weather, when you're going out and you're used to going out in the cold, and we're bundling with tights and gloves and hats. And then today, tank top and shorts, and the sun is really hot. So you start thinking about the things that maybe you weren't being so intentional at during the winter runs, more with hydration and with electrolytes, and that rate of perceived exertion really changes right now as our heart rates are really up, not used to this heat. So
Yep, this is a tricky time of year because we kind of forget how to dress, or forget how to handle ourselves in the heat, especially when a week ago it was only like 40s or 50s. So just a sneak peek for the listeners, we're going to be tackling running in hotter weather, how to train for it, how to prepare for it. So that'll be coming up in the next few weeks once it gets a little bit more consistently warm outside.
right.
But you also shared some exciting news with me about your travels coming up. Do you want to tell everybody about those?
For sure. So this weekend, I'm headed to Boston to watch the Boston Marathon on Monday. I've never actually been to the race. I've qualified a few times, but it hasn't been like a bucket list thing for me. But I'm going this weekend to cheer on my daughter's boyfriend, Go Patrick. He's going to be racing in the first wave. Super excited to cheer him on. And then I have an athlete I'd like to give a shout out to, Alicia Vogel. She's been training super hard and ready to conquer Boston as well. So might get a chance to see her. And then I have several friends that are going to be running. So super excited to be there. There's going to be some great races. Kipchoge out there, Des Linden. I'm just so excited to see all of those fantastic elites as well.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. And good luck to everybody that you're cheering on. Good luck to all the runners out there. Good luck to everybody spectating and whatnot. Yeah, it's a fantastic, electrifying experience from what I've been told. And it's definitely on my bucket list to go out there and experience it at some point. So definitely take some photos, and I can't wait to hear how it all went down. So you'll have to let us know next time. But
Okay, sounds good.
our topic today is going to be cross training and how we cross train for our ultra marathons. So I guess to start the podcast, what I want to talk about is, I guess I want to ask or answer the question, what is cross training? And Loretta, when somebody comes up to you and wants to know about cross training, what do you tell them? How do you define it?
So cross training to me is a cardio effort that's different than the running that we're doing. So, a lot of people have different things that they already come in with that they are participating as cross training, whether it's swimming or maybe they're doing spin class or cycling. Those are the kinds of things that I consider more of a cross training type effort. I wouldn't consider strength training in with cross training. I think they're two separate activities.
Yeah, I think that's really important to distinguish too, because cross training for me is going to be something that affects your cardiovascular system. Because whether you are a biker, or excuse me, a cyclist, a runner, anybody else, like, I think that a good solid strength program is going to be key to everybody's success. So I want to keep that separate and in its own type of category, because whether you do any type of endurance activity, like I think that a good strength training program can benefit you for sure. So I do like that you mentioned, it's primarily cardiovascular based, just because when we're talking about cross training, we definitely want to have some sort of a training stimulus to it. So I wouldn't really consider, gardening a type of cross training, or, a job where you're on your feet all day. I wouldn't consider that cross training, but some form of exercise where you're being intentional about, trying to accomplish a task, meet a goal, or get your heart rate above like a basal or a baseline. So we mentioned a few types of cross training. Does anything else come to mind, or do you have any other athletes that use different forms of cross training?
For sure. I have athletes that participate also in sports like tennis or softball, volleyball. Those kind of things can also be considered cross training, in my opinion, because they are getting your heart rate up. They are an activity where you are working for extended period of time. So those are some things. I have athletes that do fluid running as well, using the elliptical at the gym. Those are the things I can think of off the top of my head. What I like to do as a coach is when I first meet my athletes to kind of get an idea of what they're already doing, outside of running, so I can help. I think it's really important if you're doing cross training that you're balancing it with your running as well, because we want to have a good balance so we don't have too much intensity of one over the other, or so it's a nice fit to help you get to your running goals as well.
Yep, absolutely. And just a couple other examples too. I have an athlete, shout out Dylan. He loves to dance. So he came to me and he was like, I really don't want to give up dancing, and I'm afraid. And this is before we started working together. He goes, I really love dancing. I don't want to give it up. And I'm really afraid that you're going to tell me that, like I can't dance, or maybe I should work out on those days. I told him, I was like, if you love it, if you want to do it, like there's definitely a place where we can get the running training in that you need, but also have you do dance. So that way you're excited. You don't feel like you're deprived of things that you love. But, we're kind of using that as like a separate stimulus for fitness, overall fitness.
Right. And my athlete, Alicia, that I just mentioned that qualified for the Boston Marathon, her love is also tennis. So she's playing tennis a few times a week. So it shows she qualified for Boston, right, while playing tennis, and, just really blending that with her running training. And it works, right? I mean, there are pieces that kind of cross over with tennis and running that has been able to, I think, benefit her. She's doing a lot of fast movements on the tennis court, getting a little bit more high cardio action, and also working on agility. There's so many great things that she's getting from tennis. And then we're just able to kind of blend that and enhance her running by the tennis that she's doing. And I think it's really important, like you said, we want athletes to love life, not just love running, and there's things outside of running that people really enjoy doing. Not everyone, but a lot of people do. So I want to be able to work together and support and figure out how we can make it blend and make you successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And she is a great case study. And I have a good one too that maybe we should talk about after we get through some more examples and whatnot. So let's put a pin in that real quick, because I think that's really interesting. And you and I actually were talking about her months ago, just because we were really trying to go back and forth about hey, how do we give her the best running training with the things that she already likes to do, so that way it can eventually funnel down towards these bigger goals that she has of qualifying for Boston. So I think that's a really great success story.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Reese, because I think it's really nice that as coaches with Ornery Mule trailrun coaching, we have a team of people, and so we can bounce ideas off of each other, because we can't possibly know everything, right? So I really appreciate the conversations we're able to have to kind of work with on an athlete together, to ensure success too. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that we tend to agree a lot on the podcast, but there are plenty of times where we kind of butt heads, we kind of go after things, we pick things apart. So we're not always on the same page, but whenever we talk about things, we always come to a greater conclusion overall, with more learning and understanding for both parties. So as an organization, yeah, we value that open communication with everybody. I just wanted to briefly mention too some other types of cross training I've seen. Elliptical, elliptigo. There's some of those skier types of, they almost look like you're skiing on like a piece of machinery at the gym. I forget what those guys are called. Dancing, tennis. I've even seen baseball, pickup, people that want to continue playing pickup, softball, pickup, kickball, things like that.
Rowing.
So I think, yes, exactly.
Rowing, kayaking.
Yep. Swimming, like you mentioned before. But I think, we can kind of, delineate, or we could separate different types of cross training into two major camps that I like to think about when programming for an athlete, and that is impact activities versus non-impact activities. And I think those two are they're pretty important to think about, just because when we're talking about the overall load on somebody's body, we want to pick apart and see, okay, how much time does this activity take, and how much stress does it put on an athlete week to week? Because I think that'll impact our running training. Do you want to expand on that at all?
Yeah, I think so too. So, I mean, I have a great example with Alicia as well. So she not only plays tennis, she also has incorporated fluid running into her training. So when we're feeling like she's getting a little bit beat up from all of the impact of running, we may blend in a little bit more fluid running for her to be able to still get that same type of workout, same type of motion without the impact of the ground, right? She's in the water, she's still getting that same great workout, but not having that impact all the time. So I think that's one way that I've used, more of that non-impact pieces. But then,
Absolutely.
yeah. But then if we're looking at her tennis, then we're like, whoa, she's getting a lot of impact, a lot of turning, a lot of twisting in her body.
Yep, exactly. And a lot of lateral motions. That's the nice thing about those sports, is that they'll give you a different type of stimulus, especially in your hips, cutting left and right. Like when you're in tennis, reacting to the ball coming at you, you're working your hips out in a different motion. I think that is
Right.
beneficial for people, just because running and cycling really only work the forwards backwards motion, and we forget that our hips can do side to side, they can move in big circles, they can internally rotate, externally rotate. So I think cross training is perfect for just starting to address some of those key areas of fitness and a healthy body that running doesn't always address.
Right.
But
I did
yeah,
have
when
an athlete that used that used an elliptigo too. And that was a good way for non-impact, but the same motion as running.
Yeah. And whenever I look at those non-impact activities too, I take them, I use them more liberally than impact activities. And I'm a little bit more cautious with impact activities, just because running itself is a loaded exercise. It's an impact exercise, right? So if we continue to put impact load after impact load after impact load, sometimes we can, put a little too much force on the body. So, in the case of your athlete, like, like just being aware of what that sport demands from the body is going to be huge. And as coaches, that's something that we always keep in mind, is how stressful is this, and what kind of intention are our athletes taking with the activity. So, doing the elliptigo, doing cycling, doing rollerblading or skiing or skate skiing, those are going to be more of a cardiovascular benefit, instead of like an impact loading benefit. So I think that's a great way to just keep accumulating heartbeats and getting your body to work and metabolize energy. So I think that as far as its benefit towards ultra marathoning, yeah, we might not be loading up the legs like you would with the run, but we're still conditioning your heart, your lungs, your veins, your arteries, your capillaries, your mitochondria, to just working and putting out power, putting out velocity, doing work. So I think that's huge. As far as how you measure cross training load, where do you start with an athlete that comes to you and says, I want to do this activity in conjunction with my running? How do you start to break apart how stressful it is for the person, so that way you can set up good parameters during the training, so that way they can enjoy their activity but not start to dig themselves into a hole?
Right. So I like to program that in more of a time based, so I can kind of think about how much time they're going to be training throughout the week. We're looking at mileage for running, but we can also look at time for that. So you can kind of look at time based all across with all of those different activities, and I think it makes more sense to kind of look at time with that when we're blending that in. And then I also like to look at intensity, like let's say they are going to be doing cycling. What kind of intensity are they going to be doing on those? Are they going to be doing tempo rides? Are they going to be, incorporating endurance rides, or is it going to be more of recovery ride? Like what is their purpose for their running? Is it just, or their cycling? Is it just for enjoyment? Or is there a purpose for that too, I think, and kind of blending that together. So there's a good balance when we're looking at the week overall, we really need to look at stressors, right? How many different stressors are on your body, and we want to limit that high stress throughout the week, so that we're doing things more in that more easy recovery kind of range. So we have to be careful when we're balancing all of that together.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important what you said before about looking at the intensity of the cross training, because some people, their goal with cross training is to get an extra workout. And some people, their goal with cross training is to just enjoy some other type of movement. So I have a lot of athletes that I coach that they just want to use this as, an adjunct to their running training to be easy and to get a little bit more time. Maybe they carve 1 hour a day for their exercise every single day of the week. We don't want to be running, maybe somebody's not at the point where they can be running 7 days a week for an hour, but, maybe we can do a run on day 1, and then we can do a little bit of cycling cross training on day 2, keep it nice and easy, accumulate some heartbeats, get the body doing some work, but then have the joints and skeletal muscular system repair for the next following day. So I really like to do that with athletes, especially athletes who are trying to go for these longer races, but like their volume might be a little bit lower compared to what we typically see for people in big races. Me personally, I love to cycle. I love to get outside and go downhill really fast. I like to get in the aero position and just gun it. So for me personally, it's all about enjoyment, and it's about finding that like sense of exploration through a different means. So therefore, like I try to keep most of my cross training easy or as an adjunct to my running training, and not let it take over or put so much stress on my body that I can't show up for the next running workout. Then again, like we were talking, some people want to use it for a workout. So if somebody wants to use, let's just use cycling, because I feel like that's a very common type of cross training activity for us ultra runners, whether it's cycling on the roads or doing some mountain biking. Somebody wants to come to you and say they want to do some mountain biking as cross training. How do you talk them through that?
So, and that would be because they want to do it with intensity. Is that what you're saying? It's not just enjoyment at that point, or?
Yep, they want to do some
Okay.
intensity. They want to do running workouts, but they also want to do some cycling workouts.
Okay. So I also would blend that with what is their running workouts, so are we doing a tempo run this week, or are we doing a tempo ride, kind of breaking that up. Sometimes I have athletes that are also triathletes. So, we're doing doubles as well, with biking and cycling and swimming, kind of blending that all together. So for me, I would be guiding them again about intensity, making sure that they have balance with the running workouts that they're doing. I don't want them to be doing all hard cycling and, not doing some easy cycling. We need to kind of balance that out, because we're going to have some hard running days too. So we have to have a balance.
Yeah, that's great.
What do you do? How do you balance it out? What do you guide?
This is when I come back to RPE and what are we trying to accomplish out
Yes.
of the workout. So like if somebody's goal is I want to run this running race, but I also love to do biking workouts and bike hard, then it's like, okay, maybe we have one key day where you have your key running workout that's going to be specific to the race that's coming up, right? Like that's the focus. We got to make sure that we are like in tip top shape for that day. We're recovered so we can give it a hard effort, right? So maybe we have running workout on a certain day, and then maybe an extra day after that, 2 days after that, we do a cycling workout. So we prioritize the running workout just because that's what the goal is. But then afterwards, we can add in another biking workout. Say like I'm a fan of block periodization. So, if we do 4 weeks at a tempo intensity, then both your running and your cycling efforts are going to include some tempo intensity. Because even though your body might be doing something else, the way that affects your ability to put out work, the way that it affects your heart and your metabolism is going to be about the same. Intensity is intensity for anybody, right? Or
Right.
it's the same no matter what modality you're using.
The other thing I think, yeah, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say the heart doesn't know if you're running or if
Right.
you're biking, So what were you going to
Right.
add?
What I was going to add is I also think that if running is priority, running should, if you have 2 workouts in a day, running should be the first workout. and then cycling the second workout so that you can really get the quality out of the running workout that you're hoping for. And then, getting in your cycling too, if that's not as important as the running is to you. It all depends on your priorities and your goals.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that's where that key principle of like prioritize the priority, and then let everything else kind of be an adjunct. But I think that's where it gets back to the central gains versus the peripheral gains for your body, your cardiovascular system, and your musculoskeletal system. Because like we said before, biking and running, your heart doesn't know what modality you're using. So regardless if it's pumping at anything above like a baseline, it's going to be getting stronger in that aerobic zone. And then we can even say that at higher intensities, you're going to be getting the same type of metabolic effects too, of just, being at an aerobic zone, being at a tempo zone, being at like a VO2 zone. So that's where we can kind of say like, okay, we maybe, we schedule your running workout to be in this zone, but then we also try to get your biking workout in this zone. So that way you're still getting the same central stimulus, but if you're going to be biking in conjunction with your running, the biking's not going to, it's not going to wear you down quite as much just because there's no impact load. But with the idea being that we still want that key piece of, loading on the body, because if your race has to do with running, you definitely want to foster that, that turnover of the legs, get those biomechanics, in tip-top shape. So that way your legs turn over nice and efficiently, and you're not wasting any energy down the trail. So that's, what about, let's see here. What about like walking in cross training? Like, do you have any athletes come to you and say like, oh, I want to walk or I want to hike? How do you tackle those two different options?
Right, for sure. So especially, depending on what event that they're training for, but I feel like when we're getting into these bigger events, 50 miles, 100 miles, that we really want to incorporate some sort of hiking, or what I would call power hiking, power walking, so that they can get used to having that different motion. It's a little bit different than using a few different muscles than you are with running. It's the same kind of motion, but still different muscles. You need to be prepared for that, because if you're going to be incorporating that in your race, you want your body to be used to using those muscles, right? So I like to have them focus on a power hiking, so a faster walk. So, you're walking with a purpose, maybe between 15 minutes and 18-minute pace, where you're working more into that low zone 1 heart rate. And also I like to incorporate that with, depending on what their race that they're doing. If they're doing races with climbing, out there on trails that, have hills and hiking, or if we need to use the treadmill and working on incline and building that ability to do climbs at a good effort, right? Because when we're thinking about cutoff times, when we need to keep it in that 15 to 18-minute pace, or we're going to be pushing a 30-hour cutoff. So those kinds of things is what I really like to incorporate, within my plans for especially people that are, going to incorporate walking into their running and into their racing. And I also, work with them with their running portion. They may be doing some run walk during their training as well. So, working on that as the volume increases on their long runs, and blending that into their long run so that they're used to that. They, know exactly how that feels. So when race day comes, they've already practiced it. How about you? What do you do with hiking and walking, and what's your thoughts on that?
I guess my first thought is that with walking, I don't think about it as training. I think about it as the preparation for which we can then build the base for your endurance, and then you can layer everything else on top, right? So I think that, we all hear this thing about like build a big aerobic base, and it's like, but that aerobic base even sits on something, right? And I think what it sits on is this athletic body that can be durable and do work. And I think walking is a great way to not necessarily incur like a training stimulus, but to get a little bit of time on your feet, to get your muscles moving. I see it as, like it should be like a a restoration type of activity. So I always tell my athletes, like if we think about like a 3-zone model, like zone 1 is going to be your easy, zone 2 is going to be your moderate, zone 3 is going to be your hard. I see walking as below zone 1 or right up to zone 1. So that, like I've had some people ask me like, oh, like I want to go walk my dog later today, but I don't know if I should do that because I have a run coming up tomorrow, and it's like, no, go out and walk your dog. Take it nice and easy, take it nice and light, de-stress, breathe some good air. It's all good. When it comes to hiking, I do see that as cross training, whereas walking, I don't necessarily see as cross training. And the reason being is because when people go out for a hike, unless it's a really easy hike, I kind of want you to go out there with purpose. I want you walking with purpose. I want you taking it like you're going to be taking your hiking in your racing. With these longer runs, with these longer races, like it's definitely, you definitely got to think, okay, you're going to be running a portion, but you're also going to be hiking a portion. And the transitions between the two are just as important as doing each in and of itself. I noticed with Kettle was my first 100-mile race. And every race up until then, I just ran completely all the way through. And during Kettle, I noticed that like I'd be hiking up hills and then I would crest the hill and I'd start going down and I'd think to myself, okay, now I need to start running. But it was really hard for me to start running when I was already going downhill because it's like, oh man, my legs are now just getting all this impact. Halfway through the race, I realized, oh shoot, like if I'm going up the hill and I start to run just a little bit just before I crest the hill, my legs are already kind of in a little bit higher of a gear. So that way when I crest and go downhill, it's a much easier transition. So I'll have my athletes go out for walks, and I call these transition walks where, hey, we're going out there and we're doing intervals of just going back and forth from walking to running to get you used to how that feels. Maybe you're under some sort of, physical fatigue, and it's harder to get up into that running motion after you've already kind of like slowed down and gone into your hike or gone into your run. So I think that, telling athletes like, hey, go and do hiking repeats where you find some hilly terrain, you hike and you start to strategize, okay, how do I feel best transitioning from hiking to running as the terrain changes? It's going to be different for everybody. Some people like to crest a hill and then start running when you're going down. Some people like me, you want to start running a little bit before the crest and then carry that momentum going down the hill. So I think that practice is huge for people, but I do consider that cross training just because your effort is going to be a little bit higher, especially if you're hiking, it's definitely common on a hilly route to get, your heart rate into like the 120s, 130s, depending on what elevation you're at, what altitude you're at, what kind of elevation is on the course. So since that is a little bit more demanding on the body, I consider that cross training for sure.
Right. And I think, I think we're on the same page. I just kind of want to clarify. So when I talk about power walking, I think that you're on the same page with me because I'm not looking at it. It's not just a leisurely stroll, right? It's not just going out for a walk. It's going out for a walk with purpose, just like a hike with purpose. And so I think we're, on the same page. And also you're incorporating running and hiking together, and I'm doing that through their run, like their long run, so I think we're doing a lot of the same things with our athletes to get them ready for races, especially if there's going to be some power hiking involved. What are your thoughts on walking with a weighted vest? A lot of people do train that way, especially if they're going to be doing like mountain races. Thoughts on that?
This is a really good question because there's a lot of coaches that are very for it, and then there's a lot of coaches that are very against it. I think the pros are going to be that you're weighting your body a little bit more, and I do like that it's a little bit more around your center of mass. So it's not necessarily altering your biomechanics, such as when you wear ankle weights or arm weights or something like that. So your limbs can move freely. It's just they have to exert more energy. The con I see is that it's not too specific to how you're going to be racing, unless you're going to be racing with a weight vest on. I think that, like going out and practicing, having all of your gear on you is going to be the best just to get your body used to where are these hot spots going to be coming from my vest. I do think that it has a purpose for sure, but I see that purpose more in like a base building type of or a base building period in your program. I know that there's a lot of people out there that are very for it and against it, and that's my own personal opinion. I don't necessarily like it all that much, especially if it's a heavier weight for longer runs, just because if your biomechanics break down, now you're loading up a joint in a biomechanically compromised position. So I think that, if we go into the run or into the hike with this intention of like, hey, I'm going to go easy, I'm going to go smooth and just make sure my stride feels really clean. And if I feel any aches or niggles, then I'm going to back off, or I'm just going to hike it out. I think also a way that it could be really incorporated efficiently is doing hiking repeats up a hill. Not running, just because I feel like the coming downwards down the hill with a weight vest on, it's just too much loading, eccentric loading on the muscles for sure. I would rather see people take their downhills a little bit faster than take them with a little bit more weight, just for racing purposes. But going uphill, you're going to have to produce more power out of your legs anyways. And if you add a little bit of weight to that, it might just make it a little bit more efficient, or not more efficient, but you'll have to create more power. And then when you shed that weight vest and you put your racing vest on, it's going to feel a little bit easier. So I definitely think there's a time and a place for it. But as you get closer to the race, it's definitely more important to practice with the gear that you're actually going to be using, just to get your body accustomed to what it's going to feel on race day.
Right. And I agree. I would use it for walking or hiking, but I would not want to incorporate it with running. I think it would be just too much impact and risk for injury. We don't all have perfect running forms, and add weight to that could be a recipe for trouble.
Yeah, for sure. Especially when, we're trail running, going downhill is already fairly, it's fairly stressful on the body anyways. So, like I would much rather have that person weighted a little bit less and take it a little bit faster with really good form for sure. But uphill hiking would be cool.
Right.
So let's go back to to your athlete's case analysis and kind of just go from start to finish. I remember, I think I was out in Salt Lake City when you originally brought this up to me. I think this was about this time last year, actually. Yeah. So what was that whole process like between both of us, and how did we kind of, reach that conclusion of how you were going to structure her training?
Right. So I had been working with Alicia for a bit. She really started out as her goal was to run a half marathon. So I've worked with her for a couple of years. And in the beginning, she wasn't incorporating so much tennis. And then she started building tennis into her training. And it probably was around this time, because last summer in September, she was training for Marquette Marathon. So now she had moved up to about maybe 4.5 hours a week, 5 hours a week of tennis. And so I was like, okay, how do I blend 5 hours a week of tennis with marathon training? Because it kind of changes the idea of traditional marathon training, right? Because you only have so much time in the week. And you also, she has a lot of impact of what she's doing. She's getting a lot of high cardio, all of those pieces. So really need to just kind of step back and think about, okay, how does this look? So for me, I haven't had somebody that plays tennis. And so I had to kind of like really think this through and think about what was the benefits of tennis, what was she gaining, and what could we take away a little bit from running, since she was spending 5 hours playing tennis. And so I had kind of thought it through, but I was unsure. And so I think I came to you to say, okay, what do you think, would be a good way to sort of blend this together? And I think you shared, your thoughts on how we could do it. And then and that was what I was thinking. So it was kind of a great confirmation for me, right? So together, I think we kind of thought, all right, so when we're looking at tennis, we're looking at higher, like maybe VO2 max type, it's like higher heart rate when you're doing some intense tennis playing. So I kind of decided, all right, so we're going to back down on a lot of her interval type work, because she's getting that 5 hours a week with tennis, with short sprints across the tennis court, right? And then we're going to focus on a tempo run day, because she still needs to be able to hold a pace for a significant amount of time. So I really focused on tempo pace at marathon pace, so marathon goal pace is where we were at. And then, of course, making sure she was still getting in a nice long run. So that's kind of the way I approached it. And we've tweaked it as she's went along, and as her goals have really changed into, like, after she qualified for the marathon. And by the way, she needed, I think, a 3:55, and she ran a 3:33 for her first marathon. So she crushed
Nice.
it. I mean, you know, so it worked, right? I mean, we were able to blend her training. She doesn't do a significant amount of miles. So if somebody looked at her training plan, I think you would say there's no way she can run, you know, that kind of time on that low of volume of running. But when you blend that with her tennis, and of course she also does strength training, it just works for her. She's really solid. Plus she's doing what she loves, running and playing tennis.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think, you know, my original analysis too was when we were talking about this, her background was, you know, she was running relatively lower mileage because she was getting that tennis work in. And we kind of talked about it and said, well, hey, she's getting a lot of this like heavy explosive type of running, either running forwards, running backwards, cutting really hard. If anybody, you know, if any listeners have played tennis, you know, there are particular times where you're resting, and then particular times where it's so intense that you don't get a chance to catch your breath until the end, until you're taking a break afterwards. So given that analysis, it's like we don't need to hammer away at these VO2 max intervals, especially with her lower, relatively lower mileage. I think both of us decided that, you know what, her ability to perform at the marathon is just going to be her ability and her training to withstand the distance, because she already
Right.
has this good top end aerobic capacity through the very intense type of training that she did. But whenever you guys were programming your workouts, it was more about either length and then adding some of these race pace intervals just to get her body
Right.
accustomed to doing that race pace after a significant time on her feet. And she
Yep.
had already been strength training too, which, is definitely that extra component that, again, like we said before, isn't considered cross training in our idea or our brains, our lexicon. So she kind of had all of these pieces already set up. So that way, as long as she continued to progress her marathon training while still enjoying tennis, there's no reason why she couldn't meet her goals. And I think it's huge too when we think about the training week. You know, how did you structure her week with these different tennis and strength training routines? If you can kind of give us a breakdown of like, where did you put the long run versus the
Mm-hmm.
tennis versus the strength training? How did that all play
Right.
out?
Right. So I'm trying to remember exactly where we were because we have done some adjustments since then. But initially we were doing really on tennis days, she was paired with strength days. So she wasn't necessarily doing additional running at that time. And usually we would have an easy day in between because tennis fell on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we had to sneak an easy day in there. And then we would incorporate a also long tennis is on Saturday, which is 2 hours. So she was doing sort of back to back, right? With a pretty hard workout on a Saturday. And then she would do long runs on Sundays. So it was a little challenging to balance the intensity. And so as we moved on into this year and we were looking at her training cycles moving into Boston, you know, she really got the drive to she's going for a sub 3 hour 30 at Boston. And wow, I think her data shows she could run a 3:20. I mean, she is really solid right now. And I think that's pretty big when you're thinking about last August, she ran a 3:33 and now, you know, we're looking at 3:20s. What we did is we really focused through transition. She likes to do fluid running. So she wanted some time, a little bit off that impact of running. So we built in more fluid running and tennis. She had a lot of tennis at that time. And that probably lasted December to around January. And then we were able to roll into we really wanted her to try to do more interval work because we really hadn't had her doing intervals because of tennis. So we dropped back a little bit on the tennis and incorporated a solid speed work session day at the indoor track at the Pettit Center. So she was able, just luckily, to join a high school coach and some of the team and did a lot of intense interval training, and she crushed it. So that was pretty exciting. And then we had a plan is, okay, we know you love tennis. this race is really important. So as we move forward after February, we're gonna cut back a little bit more on tennis, and drop the more of the fluid running. And I mean, we use fluid running as needed, to get some a little bit of impact off when we were feeling the impact. Tennis is really rough on her feet, and so that those twists, those turns have caused a little issues with that. So sometimes fluid running is a substitute that we are able to use, or the elliptical. But in the meantime, now we've cut back on tennis, we've increased intervals, we've built in a tempo run, a long run, and now she's getting really durable. So she's even added some very easy runs on tennis days, 3 miles, just to get a little bit of mileage in on tennis days. So it'll be interesting. I mean, I've watched her data and it's really, I mean, she's doing phenomenal. So I'm super excited to see her run Boston and see how it goes. So.
Yeah, definitely. A couple key things that I really like that stand out to me are, keeping in communication with the athlete, just to say, like, hey, we will definitely keep your loves and your passions in your program, but depending on the time of year, we might have to scale it up or scale it down as far as training goes, just to make sure that you reach the goals that you wanna reach. So I think prioritizing, like, how much effort do you want to give to the BQ versus how much effort do you want to give to playing tennis? We can work both in there, but that slider scale might adjust just as we go through the season. So I think that's amazing. I also
Right.
think, just as far as like her weekly training schedule goes, given her background, given, her good base work that she's already had athletically throughout her life, I do like that Saturdays you had that more like intense tennis session, which we can kind of think about as like an interval session, right? And then Sunday we had that long run, and long runs we typically do very easy. We just go out there to collect heartbeats. Maybe a couple weeks out from a race or like a month or two, you add a little bit of interval work in there, at goal pace. But, if we translate that to like running an interval session and then doing a longer workout, there's a lot of coaches that do those types of workouts if it's appropriate for their athletes too. So I think the way that we kind of treated what are the demands of, or I guess you treated what are the demands of tennis, and then how can we structure that accordingly. And then after a while of doing that type of program, her just saying, after a shorter tennis day, I can go in and get some really easy mileage and just get some heartbeats and accumulate some aerobic gain. I think that's amazing too, especially if it was her idea and she's excited for it, and it's something that isn't like an extra obligation for her, but something where it's like, oh, this is my cool down. So then we can kind of relate. It's like doing like an extended cool down after your interval session.
Right. And I think that, it's so important when we work with athletes to work with them closely to kind of know what is working for them, what isn't working for them, what they really love about training and what maybe is not so much fun. Right. And in this situation, I would never say you can't play tennis, but we had a conversation about it, and she came to the decision, like, I want to lower my tennis because, this goal of running Boston is really important to her. And she knew that she probably should increase her volume a little bit if she really wanted to reach, because now we're reaching into some pretty fast times, in the 320s this is going to be her second marathon. When I started coaching in 2021, she'd never ran a race. She ran her first 5K that summer, so we're talking about some big changes in a couple of years. So yeah, I think, so the key is, is if there's something that you love to do, there is a way to figure out to balance it. It might not be out there in the books, written up somewhere in a blanket plan, but there is a way to blend things. Just knowing things about how our body works and how to put that together to get the goals that we want, I think. And with her, she's super satisfied with the, how much progress she's made. And there has been times like we've shifted her rest day because she decided, or her interval day, for instance, was on Mondays when she was going to the track, and she just didn't like doing it on Mondays. It was just too mentally difficult for her. So we're like, okay, let's move it. And so we were able, to arrange it. And we did that a couple times this winter until we got it tweaked to a plan that she really felt comfortable with. So that's one thing that I like to be able to do too, is to know that I can make it work with you. It doesn't mean if you get a plan that you have to follow that and be stuck with it. If you have a coach, talk to them. You can adapt it to works best for you, I think.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And real quick too, before we close out the podcast, I did want to mention, my athlete. We mentioned him in the past before. Greg, he is a fantastic guy. He's got such a positive energy. We've gone through about a year now, like very fairly injury free. Of course, there's always like this little niggle that pops up here and there, right? And 2 weeks out from, or I guess a week and a half now, from a half marathon that he's got coming up, he had a little bit of tenderness in his right ankle. So he is somebody that routinely incorporates biking as cross training very easily as just like an extra aerobic benefit. But now with this, about a week and a half from his half marathon, we kind of switched gears and said, okay, you can run like 3 to 5K without any type of pain if it's nice and easy, or even if you give it a little bit more gas and do a couple strides. It's once he starts to do like 8K and 10K where he doesn't notice it during the run, but then after the run, it's a little bit more tender, a little bit thicker. So the way that we're incorporating some cross training is he's actually going to be doing the biking first, which one might think, hey, that's a little bit counterintuitive to what they just said. If he's focusing, if his goal is on the half marathon, why would he be biking first and then going for a short run afterwards? And the reason behind that is because I wanted to use the bike as a warm up for the rest of his body, right? We're going to warm up the tendons, the ligaments, all the soft tissue and the muscles that surround the ankle. So biking anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour, really nice and easy, will get these central gains of your heart pumping more, collecting heartbeats, but then also doing a little bit of running after that. He starts out really easy and then maybe builds into like a steady pace. Or coming up, we'll see how it works out. But over the weekend, he may be doing just a few shorter intervals after the bike at his half marathon pace. Reason behind that is because we want to get those peripheral gains of just making sure that the joints go through their range of motion, and we just kind of keep reminding the body like, hey, this is the pace and these are the joint angles that you're going to have to use on race day. So we're kind of blending it, warming up the body, getting those central gains of just aerobic heartbeats, but then also afterwards, under a little bit of fatigue, just remembering like, hey, this is how we turn over. And that will kind of help simulate like still hitting that half marathon pace, even when you're under fatigue at like mile 9 or mile 10. During the race. So we'll see how everything shakes out. Hopefully it's just, like a week-long stint of a tender and tough ankle to deal with, but it is also one of his B races. So our goals going in are like, hey, if we can get a racing stimulus here, that's awesome. But if not, it's not the end of the world. He's focused on ultra marathons. So you kind of blurred out a little bit there. Did you catch what I was saying? Okay.
I kind of caught it. I lost internet connection there for a second.
Oh, it's all good. Okay, so I was just to wrap up, I was just saying that we are going into this race as a type of B race. If he can do it, if he's healthy to do it, that is fantastic. We can get a good stimulus in there, but he's already been doing the work to increase his speed the past 8 weeks. So, I mean, like he's been doing a great job. He says, you know what? All the work that we've been doing is showing me that I'm getting faster. And I think this is great. I haven't had this type of training in a long time. If I can't do the half marathon, so that way I can save my body for these longer ultras that I really want to be doing, then that's fine. So we're going to consistently just evaluate, hey, how are you feeling? Is this a good idea? If we got to pull the plug, he's ready to pull the plug, and it's not a big deal because we want to make sure that he's healthy for these other A races for sure. So,
I love that because I think sometimes we get signed up for events. Because this is a little off topic, but kind of, comment you made is sometimes we get kind of signed up for events and we feel committed to them and like we have to do it no matter what. And I think it's so smart to be reassessing, listening to your body and deciding what's best rather than to just push through that race. Because if he just pushes through without thinking about it, it might set him back. And then maybe he doesn't even get to run his A race this year, So I think it's really smart that you're working with him and teaching him that. I think that it's so important. It's hard as athletes to miss out on things or be training for something and not be able to do it. But in the long run, you have to look at the big picture, not just at that one single race. There's going to be lots and lots and lots of other races, So my takeaway for today is like, listen to your body. You can use cross training for fun. You can use cross training as a way, if you're having a little niggle here or there, or if you do have a major injury, there's ways to incorporate it. and it's going to help you in the long run. I think, of course, we need to be getting in running miles as well to be able to run these big events, but these pieces can be ancillary to our running.
Absolutely. That was a beautiful wrap up, Loretta. It's been a pleasure talking with you over the past hour. And listeners, we always love to hear feedback. Like this is ultra running. It's dirty. Everybody does things a little bit differently. Hit us up in the comments. Let us know if you have anything to add. Let us know if you have anything that you want to challenge. Like we love talking about this to reach greater conclusions so that way we can all learn and we can all have the most fun and get the best training in that we can. So drop us a link in the comments and we'll see you next week.
All right. Bye.
Bye.